The spring rain fell in sheets across the muddy main street of Silver Reef, Utah, but it couldn't wash away the whispers that followed Nora Fletcher like a shadow. She kept her chin high as she made her way from the general store, clutching her paper-wrapped parcels against her chest, the black morning dress she'd worn for 11 months now clinging to her slender frame. At 26, the title of widow hung around her neck like a noose, strangling her chances at a respectable life in this silver mining town where women were scarce and gossip plentiful. "There goes Fletcher's widow," came a voice from the boardwalk, intentionally loud enough for Nora to hear. "Poor Thomas barely cold in his grave, and she's already fixing her hair nice again." Nora's steps faltered, but she steadied herself. April 1879 marked nearly a year since the cave in that had claimed her husband's life, along with 11 other miners. A year of grief, solitude, and struggling to maintain the small ranch Thomas had left her on the outskirts of town. "Afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher," Sheriff Dempsey called out kindly from beneath the overhang of his office. He was one of the few who treated her with consistent respect. "Weather's turning nasty. You need an escort home." "Thank you, Sheriff, but I can manage," Nora replied, forcing a smile. "I've got errands to finish before heading back." The sheriff nodded, tipping his hat as she passed. Nora appreciated his concern but couldn't bear another moment of pity. She'd had enough of that to last a lifetime. As she approached the bank, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. The swinging doors burst open, and two men tumbled onto the boardwalk in a tangle of limbs and curses. Nora instinctively stepped back as the fight spilled into the street, the mud splashing up around the men's boots as they exchanged blows. From inside the saloon emerged a tall figure, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. Without hesitation, he strode into the downpour, grabbed both brawlers by their collars, and wrenched them apart with remarkable strength. "That's enough," his deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Take your disagreement elsewhere before I decide to get truly involved." Something in his tone made both men pause. They exchanged glances, muttered apologies, and slunk away in opposite directions. The stranger stood for a moment in the rain, seemingly unbothered by the downpour. When he turned, his eyes met Nora's across the street. They were a startling blue clear as a mountain lake, set in a sun-weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He couldn't have been more than 35, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. He nodded politely in her direction before returning to the saloon. Nora realized she'd been staring and quickly continued toward the bank, her heart racing unexpectedly. She hadn't felt that particular flutter since Thomas had courted her back in Denver. Inside the bank, Mr. Hollister greeted her with his usual barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, peering over his spectacles. "Your payment is late, again." "Only by 3 days, Mr. Hollister," Nora replied, setting her parcels down and retrieving a small pouch from her reticule. "I've brought it in full, plus the interest we discussed." The banker counted the coins methodically. "This arrangement cannot continue indefinitely, Mrs. Fletcher. A woman alone cannot manage a ranch properly. It's simply not natural." Nora stiffened. "I've met every payment, Mr. Hollister. The ranch produces enough to sustain itself." "For now, perhaps," he conceded reluctantly, writing her a receipt. "But you should consider selling before things deteriorate. I know several interested parties who would offer a fair price." "The ranch is not for sale," Nora said firmly, taking the receipt. "It's my home." "It was your husband's home," Hollister corrected. "A woman needs security, Mrs. Fletcher. You should remarry, though I understand your options are limited given your circumstances." Nora's cheeks burned. "Good day, Mr. Hollister." As she stepped back onto the street, the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle. She took a deep breath of the fresh, petrichor-scented air, trying to calm her nerves. She had one more stop at the post office before she could retreat to the solitude of her ranch. Inside the post office, the postmaster's wife, Edith Miller, was sorting mail alongside her daughter Beatrice. Both women paused their chatter when Nora entered. "Mrs. Fletcher," Edith acknowledged stiffly. "I'm expecting a letter from my sister in Denver," Nora said. While Edith checked the mail slots, Beatrice leaned over the counter, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. At 19, she was the town's most notorious gossip. "Did you see the newcomer?" Beatrice asked in a stage whisper. "Arrived yesterday, name's Wade Lawson. Riding through on his way to California, so they say. Quite handsome for a man with so much trail dust on him." "I don't concern myself with passing strangers," Nora replied, though she immediately recognized the description of the man who'd broken up the fight. "Well, you might want to," Beatrice continued, ignoring her mother's warning glance. "Town hasn't seen such excitement since." She trailed off, realizing too late where her words were leading. "Since my husband and 11 others died in the mine collapse," Nora finished for her. "Yes, I imagine that was quite exciting for those not directly affected," Edith returned, mercifully interrupting the awkward moment. "Nothing today, Mrs. Fletcher." Nora nodded and turned to leave, but Beatrice wasn't finished. "It's just that. Well, life goes on, doesn't it? Thomas has been gone nearly a year. People are starting to wonder if you'll wear black forever." "Beatrice," her mother scolded. "What? I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. She's young still. It's unnatural to stay alone." Nora gripped her parcels tighter. "What's unnatural is how eager this town is to dictate how I should grieve, how long I should mourn, and what I should do with the rest of my life." She pushed open the door and nearly collided with a solid chest. Strong hands steadied her before she could stumble. Looking up, she found herself staring into those same clear blue eyes she'd noticed earlier Wade Lawson himself. "Pardon me, madam," he said, quickly releasing her arms and stepping aside. Nora mumbled an acknowledgement and hurried past, feeling the weight of stares from passers-by. Just what she needed to be seen in close contact with the handsome stranger. The gossip mill would be churning before sundown. She made her way to the livery where she'd left her wagon and horse. The stable boy, Jacob, helped load her purchases. "Storm's passing east, Mrs. Fletcher," he said, glancing at the clearing sky. "Should have clear roads home, but the creek might be running high at the crossing." "Thank you, Jacob," Nora said, pressing a penny into his hand. The boy was one of the few people in town who treated her normally. As she climbed onto the wagon seat, she noticed Wade Lawson across the street, speaking with Sheriff Dempsey. Both men glanced in her direction, and she quickly looked away, snapping the reins to get her horse moving. The road out of Silver Reef meandered through red rock formations before opening to the valley, where scattered ranches and homesteads dotted the landscape. Nora's property lay 3 miles from town, close enough for necessity, but far enough for solitude. The creek crossing, as Jacob had warned, was swollen with rainwater. Nora paused at the bank, evaluating the depth and current. It appeared passable, though barely. She urged her horse forward cautiously. Midway across, the wagon lurched suddenly as a wheel caught on something beneath the churning water. The horse whinnied in alarm, straining against the harness. Nora felt the wagon shift precariously. "Easy, boy," she called to her horse, but the animal was panicking, sensing the wagon's unsteady position. With a sickening crack, the wheel broke free along with a large portion of the wagon bed. Nora found herself pitched sideways into the cold, rushing water. She gasped as the current pulled at her skirts, dragging her under momentarily before she surfaced, sputtering. The wagon was tilting dangerously, packages floating away in the current. Her horse neighed frantically, still hitched to the damaged vehicle. Nora struggled toward the bank, fighting against her sodden clothing. Just as her feet found purchase on the slippery creek bottom, a splash sounded behind her and strong arms encircled her waist. "I've got you," came a deep voice in her ear. Wade Lawson half carried, half dragged her to the bank, setting her down gently on solid ground before immediately turning back to the creek. He waded back in, speaking soothingly to her frightened horse as he worked to free the animal from its harness. Nora sat shivering, watching in stunned silence as this stranger calmly saved her horse, then methodically salvaged what he could from her damaged wagon. When he'd retrieved everything possible, he led her horse to the bank and secured it to a nearby tree. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her, his blue eyes scanning her for injuries. "And no," Nora managed through chattering teeth. "Just cold and embarrassed." Wade shrugged out of his duster coat and draped it around her shoulders despite it being damp from his rescue efforts. The warmth of his body lingered in the fabric. Creek's running higher than it looks from the bank, he observed. Wheel got caught on a boulder that's usually visible. How did you? Nora began. I was heading out of town, saw you from the ridge. He nodded toward the high ground overlooking the creek. Good thing, too. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. His eyebrow raised slightly. You know my name. Silver Reef is a small town. News travels fast. Nora pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, especially about newcomers. Wade nodded, a hint of amusement crossing his features. Your wagon's not going anywhere today. Wheels busted and the axle might be damaged too. Nora sighed, surveying the wreckage. Most of her supplies were soaked or lost. The thought of walking back to town, dripping wet and defeated, made her stomach clench. My ranch is just over that rise, she said, pointing. If you could help me with my horse, I can manage from there. Wade studied her for a moment, then the cloudy sky. Storm's not done, more rain coming. I'll see you home properly, Mrs. Fletcher, Nora Fletcher, Wade Lawson, he said unnecessarily, offering his hand. When she took it, his warm, calloused grip enveloped her cold fingers completely. Let me gather what's salvageable and we'll get you home before the next downpour. True to his word, Wade efficiently collected her scattered belongings, secured what remained of her wagon as best he could, and helped Nora onto her horse. He led the animal by the reins, walking beside it toward her property. As they crested the rise, Nora's ranch came into view. It wasn't grand, a modest single-story house with a small barn, corral, and bunkhouse. Fields stretched behind it, with a small herd of cattle visible in the distance. You manage this alone? Wade asked, no judgment in his tone, just curiosity. I have a hired hand, Eduardo. He was Thomas's friend. He helps with the heavy work and the cattle. Nora hesitated, then added, It's not much, but it's mine. Wade nodded approvingly. Good land, well situated. As they approached the house, Eduardo emerged from the barn, looking concerned at Nora's bedraggled state and the stranger leading her horse. Senora Fletcher, what happened? The older Mexican man hurried toward them, eyeing Wade suspiciously. Nora quickly explained about the creek and Wade's timely rescue. Eduardo's demeanor softened immediately, and he took charge of the horse while Wade helped Nora down. The wagon's still at the crossing, Nora told Eduardo. What could be salvaged is here, but it needs repairs. I will see to it tomorrow, Senora, Eduardo assured her, leading the horse toward the barn. You should get dry before you catch your death. Inside the house, Nora suddenly felt acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the intimacy of having a stranger in her home. She stood awkwardly in the parlor, dripping on the wooden floor. I should change, she said, still clutching his coat around her shoulders. I'll wait outside, Wade offered, turning toward the door. No, Nora said quickly. It's starting to rain again. Please make yourself comfortable. The fire needs stoking. I won't be long. In her bedroom, Nora peeled off her sodden black dress with shaking fingers. The heavy fabric clung to her like a second skin, as if reluctant to relinquish its hold. She dried herself hastily and donned a simple navy blue day dress, not her morning attire. She paused, catching sight of her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. For the first time in months, color tinged her cheeks. Her dark hair, coming loose from its pins, fell in damp tendrils around her face. She hesitated, then decided to rebraid it properly rather than simply tucking it back up. When she returned to the parlor, Wade had indeed stoked the fire to a cheerful blaze and was standing with his back to her, studying a photograph on the mantel. That was taken on our wedding day, Nora said softly. Wade turned. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes as he took in her changed appearance. You look like a different person without all that black. Nora wasn't sure how to respond to such directness. Thomas has been gone almost a year, she said, as if justifying her change of clothes. But the town expects certain things of a widow. And what do you expect of yourself? Wade asked. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted since Thomas died. Everyone simply told her what she should do, how she should behave. I'm not sure anymore, she admitted, but I should offer you some hospitality after your help. Are you hungry? I can prepare something. Wade accepted, and Nora busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for the distraction. As she worked, he told her about his journey from Texas, heading to California where his brother had settled. Just passing through then, Nora asked, setting a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee before him. That was the plan, Wade said, accepting the food gratefully. Though I might linger a few days. Sheriff mentioned the livery might need help with some difficult horses. They ate together at the kitchen table, the rain pattering against the windows creating a cocoon of isolation from the outside world. Wade spoke little of himself beyond the basics. Former ranch foreman from Texas, experienced with horses, no wife or children. Instead, he asked about her ranch, listening intently as she explained the challenges she'd faced since Thomas's death. The cattle operation is small but sustainable, she said. Thomas had plans to expand, but the mine collapsed, Wade finished when she trailed off. Nora nodded. Silver Reef was booming then. The silver veins were rich, miners were flooding in. Thomas took work there during the winter months when the ranch needed less attention. And now I manage with Eduardo's help. The banker wants me to sell, of course. Half the town thinks it's improper for me to run it alone. And the other half, Wade asked, believes I should remarry quickly and let a husband take over, Nora said with a hint of bitterness. Preferably someone from one of the good families who have been eyeing this land. Wade studied her across the table. What do you want, Mrs. Fletcher? Again, that direct question that no one else bothered to ask. Nora considered it seriously. I want to honor what Thomas and I built together, she said finally. And I want the freedom to decide my own future on my own timeline. Wade nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. As the evening deepened, the practicalities of the situation became apparent. The storm had intensified, making travel impossible until morning. You can take the bunkhouse, Nora offered. Eduardo stays in the small cabin by the north pasture to be near the cattle. Wade thanked her and prepared to dash through the rain to the bunkhouse, but paused at the door. Your wagon will need significant repairs. I can help with that tomorrow if you'd allow it. You've already done more than enough, Mr. Lawson. Wade, he corrected. And I haven't done anything extraordinary, just what any decent person would do. With that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Nora with unexpected warmth in her chest despite the chill of the storm outside. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Nora rose early, as was her habit, and was surprised to find Wade already in the barn with Eduardo, examining the remaining parts of her salvaged wagon. Buenos dias, Senora, Eduardo called cheerfully. Senor Lawson knows much about wagons. He thinks we can repair it without going to the blacksmith in town. Wade straightened from his inspection. Good morning, Mrs. Fletcher. Hope you don't mind my early start. Nora noted he was wearing clean clothes, though still trail-worn. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd washed in the pump outside the bunkhouse. Not at all. I appreciate the help. For the next 3 days, Wade remained at the ranch, working alongside Eduardo to repair the wagon. He also helped with other tasks, mending fences, checking on the small herd of cattle, and even assisting Nora with strengthening the root cellar door that had been weakened by the heavy rains. They settled into an unexpected routine. Nora cooked meals for the three of them, and in the evenings, Wade would sit on her porch, smoking his pipe while she worked on mending or accounts. Their conversations flowed more easily with each passing day. On the fourth morning, with the wagon fully repaired, Nora knew there was no reason for Wade to stay longer. I need to go into town today, she said over breakfast. Eduardo says we're running low on feed and I should check if my sister's letter has arrived. I'll accompany you, Wade offered. I should see about that work at the livery, since I've extended my stay. They rode into Silver Reef together, Wade driving the repaired wagon while Nora sat beside him. She was acutely aware of how it would appear to the townspeople, the widow Fletcher arriving with the handsome stranger who'd been absent from town for days. Sure enough, heads turned as they made their way down the main street. Nora spotted Beatrice Miller outside the dress shop, her eyes widening at the sight of them. By the time they reached the general store, Nora could practically feel the gossip spreading like wildfire. Mrs. Fletcher, Harold Jenkins, the store owner, greeted her with unusual interest. Haven't seen you in town for several days. The storm washed out the creek crossing, Nora explained, providing her shopping list. My wagon was damaged. Jenkins's eyes darted to Wade, who was examining a display of work gloves nearby. I see you found assistance. Mr. Lawson has been kind enough to help with repairs, Nora said, keeping her tone neutral. As Jenkins gathered her supplies, Beatrice Miller and two other young women entered the store, making a poor pretense of shopping as they whispered and giggled, casting glances toward Nora and Wade. Quite the gentleman, coming to your rescue, Beatrice said, abandoning all pretense and approaching directly. The whole town's talking about it. Is that so? Nora replied evenly. I wasn't aware that common decency was such a noteworthy event in Silver Reef. Beatrice's smile tightened. Well, given your situation, Mrs. Fletcher, any man's attention is noteworthy, especially someone so. Her eyes drifted appreciatively toward Wade. Capable. My situation, as you call it, is simply that of a ranch owner conducting business, Nora said coolly. A widow, you mean, corrected one of Beatrice's companions, Sarah Blackburn, whose father owned the largest ranch in the county. It's been what? A year since Thomas passed. People are starting to talk about how eager you seem to move on. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. I wasn't aware there was a precise timetable for grief that met with the town's approval. It's just not proper, Sarah continued, her voice carrying through the now quiet store. A respectable widow doesn't invite a stranger to stay at her property unchaperoned. That's quite enough, Miss Blackburn. Wade's deep voice cut through the tension as he moved to stand beside Nora. Mrs. Fletcher offered me employment repairing her wagon, nothing more. Your insinuations are both incorrect and unkind. Sarah's face reddened, but Beatrice wasn't so easily cowed. We're only concerned for her reputation. After all, she's already disadvantaged by her situation. A widow with no family connections here, running a ranch alone, it's unnatural. What's unnatural, Wade said, his voice dangerously soft, is how quickly people condemn what they don't understand. Mrs. Fletcher has managed admirably after a terrible loss. She deserves respect, not gossip. Mr. Jenkins returned with Nora's supplies, looking uncomfortable at the confrontation taking place in his store. Wade paid for his gloves and helped gather Nora's purchases. Outside, Nora took a deep breath of fresh air, trying to calm her racing heart. Thank you for defending me, but it will only make things worse. Now they'll be certain there's something improper between us. Let them talk, Wade said dismissively. I've never put much stock in small-town gossip. That's because you can ride away from it, Nora pointed out. I have to live with these people. Wade considered this. Fair point, I'll be more circumspect, but I won't apologize for defending your honor. They completed their errands with as much efficiency as possible, though Nora felt eyes following them everywhere. At the post office, a letter from her sister finally awaited her. The postmaster handed it over with a disapproving glance at Wade standing nearby. Their final stop was the livery, where Wade inquired about work with the horses. The owner, Martin Cooper, was eager to hire someone with Wade's experience for a difficult stallion he'd acquired. I can start tomorrow, Wade told Cooper. I'll be staying in town from now on. Nora felt an unexpected pang at his words, though she knew it was for the best. As they drove back to her ranch, the silence between them was heavier than before. I apologize for complicating your life, Mrs. Fletcher, Wade said finally. It wasn't my intention. You've nothing to apologize for, Nora insisted. I'm grateful for your help. At the ranch, Wade helped unload their supplies, then collected his few belongings from the bunkhouse. As he prepared to leave, Nora handed him a package of food for his journey back to town. It isn't much, she said. But I appreciate everything you've done. Wade accepted the package, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. I'll check on your wagon in a few days, make sure the repairs are holding. Nora nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. She watched as he mounted his horse, tipped his hat to her, and rode away towards Silver Reef. Only when he disappeared from view did she realize how quiet the ranch felt in his absence. That evening, Nora finally opened her sister's letter. Margaret's flowing script filled several pages with news from Denver, updates on their parents' health, and inquiries about Nora's well-being. The final paragraph caught Nora's attention particularly. Dearest sister, I know the past year has been unimaginably difficult. Thomas was a good man, and his loss is profound. But I worry about you alone in that remote town. Perhaps it is time to consider returning to Denver. You could live with us until you decide what's next. Mother and father miss you terribly, as do I. Please consider it. You need not face everything alone. Nora set the letter aside, conflicted. Denver represented security and family, but also a retreat and admission that she couldn't manage on her own. The ranch was her home now, her connection to Thomas, and her chance to prove herself capable. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora threw herself into ranch work, determined to silence the town's gossip by sheer productivity. She rode out with Eduardo to check on the cattle, repaired fencing, and cleared irrigation channels. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying. She avoided town when possible, sending Eduardo for supplies. When she did venture in, she kept her visits brief and businesslike, ignoring the whispers and stares. She glimpsed Wade occasionally at the livery or crossing the street but maintained her distance, as did he. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Nora was working in her small vegetable garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see Sheriff Dempsey riding toward the house. "Afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher," he called, dismounting. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Sheriff," Nora said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Is something wrong?" "No, madam, just making my rounds, checking on the outlying properties." He removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Mind if I trouble you for a drink of water?" Nora led him to the well, noting how the sheriff's eyes surveyed the property appraisingly. After he'd drunk his fill, he seemed in no hurry to leave. "Place is looking good," he commented. "You've done well keeping it up." "Thank you. It's hard work, but worth it." Sheriff Dempsey nodded thoughtfully. "Been meaning to speak with you about something, Mrs. Fletcher. Mind if we sit a moment?" Concerned, Nora led him to the porch, where they settled on the simple wooden chairs. "There's been talk in town," the sheriff began, choosing his words carefully. "About you and that cowboy, Lawson." Nora stiffened. "There's nothing improper between us, Sheriff. He helped repair my wagon after the storm, nothing more." "I believe you," Dempsey assured her. "But perception matters in a town this size. Some folks are traditional in their views." "You mean they believe a woman can't function without a husband?" Nora said flatly. The sheriff sighed. "It's not just that. There's been some troubling talk at the saloon. Jeb Blackburn, Sarah's older brother, has been making some threats when he's in his cups. Says you're disrespecting Thomas's memory, that someone ought to teach you your place." Nora's blood ran cold. "Is he threatening me?" "Nothing direct enough for me to lock him up," Dempsey admitted. "But I wanted to warn you. The Blackburns have had their eye on your land since before Thomas passed. With the mine playing out, more folks are looking to ranching again." "I have no intention of selling," Nora said firmly. "I know that, madam, just suggesting you be careful. Maybe consider taking on another hand for security." After the sheriff left, Nora sat on the porch for a long time, his warning echoing in her mind. The peaceful sanctuary of her ranch suddenly felt vulnerable. That evening, she wrote to her sister, not accepting the invitation to Denver, but acknowledging the difficulties she faced. Writing it down made her situation clearer. She was determined to make her own way, but perhaps not entirely alone. 3 days later, Nora had no choice but to go into town herself. Eduardo had developed a painful tooth that needed the attention of Silver Reef's doctor, who also served as dentist. After seeing him safely to the doctor's office, Nora headed to the general store for supplies. As she turned the corner onto Main Street, she nearly collided with Wade coming out of the gunsmith's shop. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you in town." "Eduardo needed the doctor," Nora explained, suddenly aware of passers-by watching their interaction. "How are you finding your work at the livery?" "Challenging," Wade replied with a small smile. "That stallion has a mind of his own." Their conversation felt unnaturally stiff after the easy companionship they'd developed at the ranch. Before Nora could respond, a booming voice interrupted them. "Well, look at this touching reunion," Jeb Blackburn drawled, emerging from the saloon with 2 companions. His words were slightly slurred, his eyes bloodshot from drinking despite the early hour. "The widow and her cowboy." Nora tensed, remembering the sheriff's warning. Wade's posture shifted subtly, positioning himself slightly in front of her. "Mr. Blackburn," Nora acknowledged coolly. "If you'll excuse us, I have errands to complete." "Always in a hurry," Jeb continued, blocking their path. "Too busy to show proper respect for your dead husband's memory. What would Thomas think, seeing you throw yourself at the first drifter who comes along?" "That's enough, Blackburn," Wade said, his voice low but firm. "You're drunk and making a fool of yourself in public." Jeb's face darkened with anger. "Nobody asked you, Cowboy. This is between me and the widow. She needs reminding of her place. My place." Nora stepped forward, anger overcoming caution. "And what exactly is my place, according to you?" "A respectable widow mourns properly," Jeb said, his companions nodding in agreement. "She doesn't run a ranch alone, doesn't invite strange men to stay, doesn't parade around town in anything but black." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Nora was acutely aware of the spectacle they were creating. "I've mourned my husband in my own way," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Not for your approval or anyone else's. Now please step aside." Jeb moved closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. "Your ranch should go to someone who can manage it properly." "Your husband would want that." "You didn't know my husband," Nora said through gritted teeth. "I knew him well enough to know he wouldn't want his widow making a spectacle of herself," Jeb sneered. "Everyone's talking about how quickly you've moved on, how eager you are for male company." "They're mocking you for being a widow," Wade interjected, his voice cutting through Jeb's taunts. "But I say you've loved before, you'll love again. There's no shame in that." The simple, direct statement seemed to silence the entire street. Nora turned to Wade, startled by his words, not just their content, but the emotion behind them. Jeb recovered first, his face contorting with rage. "You presumptuous bastard," he growled, lunging toward Wade. What happened next was almost too quick to follow. Jeb threw a wild punch that Wade easily sidestepped. In one fluid motion, Wade gripped Jeb's extended arm and used the man's own momentum to send him sprawling face first into the muddy street. Jeb's companions moved forward, but Wade's stance, calm but ready, made them reconsider. By then, Sheriff Dempsey had pushed through the crowd, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "What's going on here?" he demanded, though his expression suggested he had a good idea already. "Just a disagreement, Sheriff," Wade said evenly. "Mr. Blackburn had too much to drink and took a tumble." Jeb struggled to his feet, mud caking his clothes and face. "He attacked me. I want him arrested." "Funny, that's not what I saw," the sheriff replied. "Looked to me like you lost your balance. Maybe you should go home and sober up." Jeb looked around at the gathered crowd, finding little sympathy. With a final venomous glare at Wade and Nora, he stomped off, his companions trailing behind. "You two all right?" Sheriff Dempsey asked quietly. Nora nodded, though her hands were trembling. Wade thanked the sheriff, then turned to Nora. "I'll walk with you while you complete your errands," he said, not a request. They continued down the street together, the crowd dispersing now that the excitement was over. Nora was intensely aware of Wade beside her, his presence both comforting and complicated. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked finally, keeping her voice low. "About loving again." Wade was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed ahead. "I did," he said simply. "Grief doesn't have a timetable. Neither does healing. The town won't let me forget I'm a widow," Nora said. "Every day I'm reminded that I'm defined by Thomas's absence. Then maybe it's time to remind them and yourself that you're defined by much more than that." Wade glanced at her, his blue eyes serious. "You're a capable rancher, a determined woman, and from what I've seen, a person of remarkable courage." His words warmed something within Nora that had been cold for a very long time. They completed her errands efficiently, Wade remaining by her side throughout. When they collected Eduardo from the doctor's office, his swollen jaw wrapped in a cloth, Wade insisted on driving them back to the ranch. "I don't like the idea of you two traveling alone after what happened," he explained, helping Eduardo into the wagon. "Blackburn's pride is hurt. Men like that can be dangerous when humiliated." Nora didn't argue. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. At the ranch, Wade helped Eduardo to his cabin, then checked the property thoroughly before preparing to leave. "I could stay in the bunkhouse tonight," he offered. just to be safe. Nora hesitated. Having him stay would only fuel the town's gossip, yet the thought of being alone after Jeb's threats was unsettling. "I can manage," she said finally. "But thank you for the offer and for everything today." Wade studied her face, then nodded. "Lock your doors tonight. I'll check on you tomorrow." True to his word, Wade rode out to the ranch the following day, and the day after that. Each visit had a practical purpose, helping with tasks Eduardo couldn't manage with his painful jaw, checking fence lines, assisting with the cattle. But as the days passed, Nora found herself looking forward to his arrival, watching the road from the kitchen window while preparing lunch. Their conversations deepened. Wade told her more about his life in Texas, working his way up from ranch hand to foreman, his dreams of someday owning land himself. Nora shared stories of her childhood in Denver, meeting Thomas when he delivered lumber to her father's furniture workshop, their decision to seek opportunity in the booming silver town of Silver Reef. "He was a good man," she said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Kind, hardworking, we had a solid partnership." "You loved him," Wade said. "It wasn't a question." "I did," Nora affirmed. "Our marriage wasn't passionate like in novels, but it was built on mutual respect and common goals." "His death left a hole in my life that I'm still learning to navigate around," Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My parents had a marriage like that, steady, dependable. When my mother passed, my father never remarried, said he'd had his portion of happiness in this life." "Do you believe that?" Nora asked. "That we only get one portion of happiness?" Wade considered the question, watching the last rays of sunlight painting the distant mesas gold and crimson. "No," he said finally. "I think life offers multiple chances at happiness, if we're brave enough to recognize and accept them." His words hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Nora found herself studying his profile, the strong jaw, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the way the evening light gilded his features. "It takes courage to try again," she said softly. "To risk loss a second time." Wade turned to meet her gaze. "Everything worthwhile involves risk." For a breathless moment, Nora thought he might reach for her hand or perhaps say something more direct. Instead, he stood and stretched, breaking the spell. "I should head back to town before it gets dark," he said. "Cooper's got me breaking that stallion at first light tomorrow." As May bloomed into June, a new routine established itself. Wade would ride out to the ranch 3 or 4 times a week, always with some practical reason, staying until sunset before returning to his room above the livery in town. On Sundays, he would join Nora and Eduardo for a proper dinner after church services. The town's gossip continued, but with less venom. Sheriff Dempsey made a point of speaking openly with Wade in public, lending his tacit approval to the Cowboy's character. Jeb Blackburn had been notably absent, having traveled to Salt Lake City on business according to local gossip. On a particularly warm June afternoon, Wade arrived at the ranch looking unusually serious. Nora was mending a fence in the south pasture, and he rode out to join her. "Cooper offered me a partnership in the livery," he said without preamble as he dismounted to help her. "He's getting older, wants someone to help manage the place with an eye toward eventually taking over." Nora's hands stilled on the wire she was stretching. "That's a good opportunity," she said carefully. "Are you considering it?" "It would mean staying in Silver Reef permanently," Wade said, watching her reaction closely. "I thought you were heading to California," Nora reminded him, "to join your brother." Wade took the pliers from her hands, finishing the repair she'd started. "Plans change. Sometimes you find reasons to stay in places you only meant to pass through." Hope fluttered in Nora's chest, but uncertainty tempered it. "The livery is a good business, stable." "It is," Wade agreed. "But I'd want your opinion before I decide." "My opinion?" Nora asked, surprised. "Why would my plans factor into your decision?" Wade set the pliers down and faced her directly. "Because they do, Nora. These past weeks," he stopped, seemed to gather his thoughts. "I didn't plan to stay in Silver Reef. I certainly didn't plan to develop feelings for a woman I pulled from a creek, but here we are." Nora's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Wade, you don't need to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "I know your situation is complicated, I know the town watches your every move, and I know you're still finding your way after Thomas. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just letting you know where I stand." Before Nora could respond, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. 3 riders were coming fast toward the ranch from the direction of town. "Were you expecting visitors?" Wade asked. Instantly alert, Nora shook her head, squinting to make out the riders. "That's Jeb Blackburn in the lead," she said, recognizing the man's distinctive hat. "And his ranch hands with him." Wade's expression darkened. "Get behind me," he said quietly. "This is my property," Nora objected. "I won't hide." The riders galloped up and reined in hard, dust billowing around their horses' hooves. Jeb Blackburn's face was flushed with more than just the heat of the day. "Afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher," he called with exaggerated courtesy. "Hope we're not interrupting anything. Private?" "What do you want, Blackburn?" Wade asked, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. Jeb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just a neighborly visit. I've returned from Salt Lake City with some interesting news." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew an official-looking document. "Seems your husband had outstanding debts that weren't settled after his death. The territorial court has authorized me to collect on them." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "What debts?" "Thomas kept meticulous records. We paid everything we owed." "Gambling debts," Jeb said, his smile widening. "From card games at the Silver Strike Saloon." "Your husband was quite the poker player when you thought he was working late at the mine." "You're lying," Nora said fiercely. "Thomas didn't gamble." "The court disagreed," Jeb said, waving the document. "I've purchased the debt. You owe me $200, Mrs. Fletcher, due immediately." Wade stepped forward. "Let me see that document." One of Jeb's companions moved his hand to his gun. "Stay where you are, Cowboy. This doesn't concern you." "It's all right," Nora said to Wade, then addressed Jeb. "I don't have that kind of money on hand, you know that." "I figured as much," Jeb replied, feigning sympathy. "That's why I'm prepared to be reasonable. You can pay me in land instead, say, the North Pasture and water rights. That would settle the debt nicely." Now Nora understood. The North Pasture contained the best water access on her property. Without it, the rest of the ranch would be significantly devalued. "This is theft masked as legal action," she said coldly. "Sheriff Dempsey will hear about this." Jeb shrugged. "Dempsey's welcome to ride to Salt Lake City and contest the court's decision. But until then, I have a legal right to collect this debt. You have until the end of the week to decide cash or land." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following suit. They galloped away as abruptly as they'd arrived, leaving Nora and Wade in a cloud of dust. "Those documents looked official," Nora said quietly once they'd disappeared from view. "What if it's true? What if Thomas had debts I didn't know about?" Wade's expression was grim. "It's possible, but the timing is suspicious. Blackburn's been after your land, and now he shows up with a convenient claim right when the ranch is starting to prosper under your management." "What am I going to do?" Nora whispered. "I don't have $200, not without selling cattle we need for breeding." "We'll figure it out," Wade said firmly. "First, we need to see those documents properly. I'm riding into town to find the sheriff." Before sunset, Sheriff Dempsey arrived at the ranch, accompanied by Wade and, surprisingly, Mr. Hollister from the bank. "Mrs. Fletcher," the banker greeted her stiffly. Sheriff Dempsey explained the situation. "I've brought your husband's loan documents from the bank records." Inside the house, they spread the papers on the kitchen table. Mr. Hollister adjusted his spectacles and began examining everything methodically. "Thomas Fletcher maintained an account with us from the time he arrived in Silver Reef," Hollister explained. "He took one loan to purchase this land, which was repaid in full 6 months before his death." The banker looked up at Nora. "There is no record of any other outstanding debts in our files." "Gambling debts wouldn't go through the bank," Sheriff Dempsey pointed out. "No, but a man who pays his bank loans consistently isn't typically one who accumulates significant gambling debts," Hollister countered. "Additionally, I personally knew Thomas Fletcher. He occasionally played cards at the Silver Strike, yes, but for small stakes, social games." Nora looked at the banker with new respect. Though he'd been pushing her to sell the ranch, he was being scrupulously honest now. Could Blackburn have falsified the court documents? Wade asked the sheriff. Dempsey rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Possibly, but it would be a serious crime. I need to see the actual papers, compare them with legitimate court orders. He said I have until the end of the week, Nora said. What do I do in the meantime? Don't sign anything, the sheriff advised. Don't agree to any terms. I'll send a telegram to the territorial court tomorrow to verify if this debt claim is legitimate. After the sheriff and banker left, Wade remained, pacing the kitchen like a caged mountain lion. This doesn't feel right, he said. Blackburn's too confident. Even if the court papers are forgeries, he must have something else planned. What can he do? Nora asked. The sheriff's involved now. Wade stopped pacing, his expression troubled. Just be careful, keep Eduardo close to the house. And I'll stay in the bunkhouse tonight. You don't have to do that, Nora protested. You have work in town tomorrow. Cooper will understand, Wade said firmly. I'm not leaving you alone tonight. This time, Nora didn't argue. The weight of the day's events settled on her shoulders, and Wade's presence offered a comfort she was no longer willing to deny herself. That night, after checking that the bunkhouse was prepared for Wade, Nora stood on her porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was warm, fragrant with sagebrush and the distant scent of pine from the mountains. Wade joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. What you said earlier, Nora began hesitantly, before Blackburn arrived, about your feelings. I meant it, Wade said simply. But this isn't the time to discuss it with everything else happening. Nora turned to face him. On the contrary, it might be exactly the right time. Life is unpredictable, Wade. Thomas and I had plans for decades together, and in an instant they were gone. If I've learned anything from being a widow, it's that waiting for the perfect moment is a luxury we can't afford. In the silver moonlight, Wade's eyes searched hers. What are you saying, Nora? I'm saying that I have feelings for you too. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. I wasn't looking for them. I thought that part of my life was over. But you woke something in me that I thought had died with Thomas. Wade reached for her hand, enveloping it in his own. I know there are complications. The town, the ranch, Blackburn, yes, Nora interrupted. There are many practical problems to solve. But whatever happens with Blackburn and this supposed debt, I want you to know where I stand too. Wade's other hand came up to gently cup her cheek. May I kiss you, Nora Fletcher? Her answer was to rise on tiptoes and press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Wade's arms encircled her waist. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. I should go to the bunkhouse, Wade said, his voice rough with emotion, before I forget myself entirely. Nora nodded, though reluctantly. As he stepped away, she caught his hand. Thank you, Wade, not just for today, but for seeing me not as Thomas's widow, but as myself. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Nora. The following morning, Eduardo rode into town with a message from Wade for the sheriff, while Nora attended to her normal ranch duties. Despite the looming threat from Blackburn, she felt lighter than she had in months, humming as she gathered eggs and tended her garden. Around midday, the sound of approaching horses once again interrupted her work. This time it was Sheriff Dempsey, accompanied by Mr. Hollister. Any news? Nora asked anxiously as they dismounted. I sent a telegram to the territorial court, the sheriff explained. Haven't received a response yet, but something else has come to light. Mr. Hollister stepped forward, clutching his ledger. Mrs. Fletcher, I've been reviewing the bank's transactions with Jeb Blackburn. 3 weeks ago, he withdrew a substantial sum, $200, exactly the same amount he claims you owe. Nora frowned. What does that prove? It's suspicious timing, the sheriff explained. If he truly purchased a legitimate debt, why withdraw the exact amount just before claiming it from you? It suggests he might be planning to produce the money as evidence that he paid for the debt. But again, this doesn't prove anything definitively, Hollister cautioned. It's circumstantial. Where's Wade? The sheriff asked, looking around. Checking the north pasture fence line, Nora replied. He was concerned about cattle wandering onto Blackburn's property and giving him an excuse to cause trouble. As if summoned by his name, Wade appeared on horseback, riding hard from the direction of the north pasture. He reined in sharply beside them, his expression grim. Blackburn's men are cutting your fence, he reported. 3 of them, working their way along the boundary. That's destruction of property, Sheriff Dempsey said angrily. I'll ride out there now. There's more, Wade continued. They're driving some of Blackburn's cattle through the gaps. If they mix with yours, he could claim you've stolen his stock. Nora's hands clenched into fists. This is his backup plan. If the debt claim fails, he'll accuse me of cattle rustling. I need to see this for myself, the sheriff declared. Mr. Hollister, return to town and wait for that telegram response. Mrs. Fletcher, you should stay here where it's safe. This is my ranch, Nora said firmly. I'm coming with you. They rode hard toward the north pasture, Eduardo joining them after returning from town. At the boundary fence, they found exactly what Wade had described 3 of Blackburn's men deliberately cutting wire and herding cattle through. Hold it right there, Sheriff Dempsey called, drawing his pistol. Step away from that fence, the men froze, clearly surprised by the sheriff's presence. One reached for his gun but thought better of it when he saw 4 riders facing him. We're just retrieving our strays, the boldest of them claimed. They wandered onto Fletcher land. Through a fence you cut yourselves, Wade said coldly. We watched you do it. Sheriff Dempsey dismounted, examining the clean cuts in the wire. This is deliberate damage, not breaks from wandering cattle. You men are under arrest for destruction of property and attempted fraud. Blackburn will have your badge for this, one man threatened. Blackburn isn't above the law, no matter what he thinks, the sheriff replied, ordering them to drop their weapons. As the confrontation unfolded, Nora noticed movement on the ridge overlooking the pasture. Jeb Blackburn himself sat on horseback, watching the scene. When he realized he'd been spotted, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away. Sheriff, Nora called, pointing. Blackburn's escaping. Dempsey looked torn, unwilling to leave his prisoners unattended. Wade made the decision for him. I'll go after Blackburn, he said, already turning his horse. You handle these 3. Before anyone could object, Wade spurred his horse up the ridge in pursuit of Blackburn. Nora watched anxiously as the 2 riders disappeared over the crest. The sheriff efficiently disarmed and bound Blackburn's men, instructing Eduardo to help him escort them back to town. Mrs. Fletcher, you should return to the house. We don't know if Blackburn has more men in the area. I need to find Wade, Nora insisted. Blackburn's desperate and armed. All the more reason for you to stay clear, Dempsey argued, but Nora was already mounting her horse. This is my fight, Sheriff. Blackburn wants my land and he's willing to break the law to get it. I won't hide while others defend what's mine. Without waiting for a response, she rode toward the ridge where Wade and Blackburn had disappeared. The sheriff called after her, but with 3 prisoners to manage, he couldn't follow. Nora followed the obvious trail of 2 horses ridden hard across the rocky terrain. Beyond the ridge lay a maze of sandstone formations, and dry washes difficult country to navigate, but offering plenty of places for an ambush. She rode cautiously, listening for sounds of conflict. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and dust clouded the air, making it difficult to see far ahead. After 20 minutes of tense riding, she heard the distant echo of a gunshot. Heart pounding, Nora urged her horse toward the sound. As she rounded a towering sandstone column, she came upon a narrow canyon where 2 horses stood riderless. Dismounting quickly, she tied her own horse and moved forward on foot. The sound of angry voices echoed off the canyon walls. Keeping low, Nora crept forward until she could see Wade and Blackburn in a standoff. Wade was bleeding from his upper arm, his pistol trained on Blackburn, who also had his weapon drawn. You're a fool, Lawson, Blackburn was saying, fighting for a woman and land that aren't yours. What's Fletcher's widow offering that's worth dying for? Put down the gun, Blackburn, Wade replied steadily. The sheriff has your men in custody. They'll testify against you to save themselves. My family built this territory, Blackburn snarled. No court will convict me on the word of hired hands, but they won't need to, because you won't be leaving this canyon alive. And with you gone, the widow will be vulnerable again. Nora's blood ran cold at the naked threat in his voice. She needed to act, but had no weapon. Looking around desperately, she spotted a loose rock about the size of her fist. Moving silently, she retrieved it and began working her way around the edge of the canyon to position herself behind Blackburn. The debt claim was a forgery, wasn't it? Wade asked, keeping Blackburn's attention. There never were any gambling debts. Blackburn laughed harshly. Fletcher was too boring to be a real gambler. But a dead man can't defend his reputation, can he? All I needed was a convincing document and the right amount of pressure on his widow. Why not just offer to buy the ranch legitimately? Wade asked, clearly trying to keep him talking. I did through Hollister, Blackburn replied, but she refused. A woman has no business running a ranch alone. That land should belong to someone who can use it properly. Someone like you. Wade's tone was contemptuous. A man who resorts to forgery and fence cutting when he can't get his way. Blackburn's face contorted with rage. I've wasted enough time talking, he growled. Raising his pistol more deliberately, Nora acted without thinking. She stepped from her hiding place and hurled the rock with all her strength at Blackburn's back. Her aim was true. The rock struck him between the shoulder blades, causing him to stagger forward with a cry of pain. His gun discharged harmlessly into the ground. Wade seized the opportunity, lunging forward to tackle Blackburn before he could recover. The two men grappled in the dust, Blackburn fighting with the desperation of a man facing ruin, Wade with the controlled strength of someone protecting what he valued. Despite his wounded arm, Wade managed to overpower Blackburn, pinning him face down and wrenching his gun away. Only then did he look up and see Nora standing there. Nora, what are you doing here? He demanded, shock and concern warring in his expression. Apparently saving your life, she replied, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. Are you badly hurt? Just grazed, Wade assured her, though the bloodstain on his sleeve suggested otherwise. He kept Blackburn firmly pinned beneath him. Do you have something we can tie him with? Nora quickly fashioned restraints from her horse's reins, and together they bound Blackburn's hands and feet. The rancher cursed and threatened them continuously until Wade gagged him with a bandana. We need to get him back to town, Wade said, examining his wounded arm with a grimace. The sheriff will want his prize catch. Your arm needs attention first, Nora insisted. She tore a strip from her petticoat and bound the wound as best she could. I was so afraid when I heard that gunshot. Wade's free hand came up to cup her cheek. You shouldn't have followed us. But I'm glad you did. With considerable effort, they managed to get Blackburn onto his horse, tied securely to prevent escape. The journey back to Silver Reef was slow, the three riders making an unusual procession as they entered town just as dusk was falling. Sheriff Dempsey met them outside his office, relief evident on his face. I was about to organize a search party, he said, helping Wade dismount. Blackburn's men have already started talking, hoping for leniency. This should be enough to put him away for a long while. As Blackburn was led away to the jail, the town doctor examined Wade's arm. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, though the wound required cleaning and stitches. Nora stayed by his side throughout the procedure, her hand gripping his tightly. I received a response from the territorial court while you were gone, Sheriff Dempsey told them as the doctor worked. No record of any gambling debts in Thomas Fletcher's name. The document Blackburn produced was a complete forgery. That means the ranch is safe, Nora said, relief washing over her. More than that, the sheriff continued. Blackburn's facing serious charges: forgery, destruction of property, assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder. His family has influence, but even they can't make this disappear. Later, as Wade and Nora walked slowly back to the livery to collect their horses for the ride to the ranch, the town seemed different. People nodded respectfully to Nora, their expressions curious but no longer judgmental. Word travels fast, Wade observed. By morning, everyone will know what Blackburn tried to do. And how you stood against him, Nora added softly. For me, in the growing darkness of the livery stable, Wade turned to her. Not just for you, Nora, for us, if you want there to be an us. Nora stepped closer, her hands coming to rest on his chest. I do. I'm still Thomas's widow, and I always will be in some ways, but I'm also a woman who's found an unexpected second chance at happiness. I'd be a fool to turn away from that. Wade's kiss was gentle, mindful of his injured arm but filled with promise. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm taking Cooper's offer, he said, staying in Silver Reef, building a life here. With me. Nora asked, allowing herself to voice the hope that had been growing within her. If you'll have me, Wade replied, though the town will talk. Nora laughed softly. Let them talk, they will anyway. On the ride back to the ranch, side by side under a canopy of stars, Nora felt a peace she hadn't known since before Thomas's death. Her grief would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her future. Summer turned to autumn, and Silver Reef began to accept the relationship between the widow Fletcher and the livery partner Lawson. Some still whispered, of course, but the events with Blackburn had changed the town's perception of Nora. She was no longer just a widow struggling to maintain her husband's legacy, but a woman who had fought for her land and won. Wade spent more time at the ranch, helping with the heavier work and spending evenings with Nora on the porch. By the first snowfall in November, they had made their intentions clear to the town by announcing their engagement. Too soon, some still muttered. Disrespectful to Thomas's memory. But many more, including Sheriff Dempsey and, surprisingly, Banker Hollister, offered sincere congratulations. Life's too short to deny happiness when you find it, the sheriff told Nora after church one Sunday. Thomas would want you to be happy. Eduardo, who had known Thomas best, gave his blessing most emphatically. Senor Fletcher wanted this ranch to thrive and for you to be protected, Senora, he told Nora. Senor Lawson helps with both. It is good. They were married on Christmas Day, 1879, in Silver Reef's small church. Nora wore blue instead of traditional white, a nod to her status as a widow, but also a declaration that this was a new beginning, not a repetition of the past. Wade moved into the ranch house, though they maintained his room above the livery for nights when business kept him in town. Together, they expanded the ranch operations, adding more cattle and improving the irrigation system for the fields. In February 1880, a letter arrived from Nora's sister in Denver, responding to the news of the marriage. Dearest Nora, I confess I was surprised by your announcement, but the happiness in your words is unmistakable. Mother and father send their blessings and are eager to meet the man who has brought such joy back into your life. We hope to visit in the spring, if the trains are running reliably by then. Your description of Wade reminds me of what you once said about Thomas, that he sees you clearly and values your strength rather than trying to diminish it. Perhaps that is the true measure of a good partnership. I am so pleased that you have found love again, sister. You deserve every happiness. Spring arrived with new growth across the ranch and news that the territorial court had sentenced Jeb Blackburn to 5 years in prison for his crimes. His family had withdrawn from local affairs, their influence diminished by the scandal. On a warm May evening, exactly 1 year after Wade had first pulled Nora from the flooding creek, they sat together on the porch swing he had built as a wedding gift. I have something to tell you, Nora said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. We'll need to prepare the small bedroom by autumn. Wade's eyes widened, a smile spreading across his face. Truly, Nora nodded, her own smile radiant. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you. Wade gathered her into his arms, his joy palpable. I never thought I'd have this, he confessed against her hair. A wife, a child, land that feels like home. Nor did I after Thomas died, Nora replied. I thought that chapter of my life was finished. Wade pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. You loved before, he said softly, echoing his words from that confrontation with Blackburn nearly a year ago. And you've loved again. Yes, Nora agreed, rising to kiss him as the setting sun bathed their land in golden light. And how fortunate I am to have known both. Their son, William Thomas Lawson, was born in October 1880, with Eduardo proudly serving as godfather. The following spring, Nora's parents and sister visited from Denver, filling the ranch house with family and laughter. Over the years, Wade and Nora expanded their holdings, eventually purchasing the struggling Blackburn Ranch when it went up for auction after Jeb's imprisonment. Wade's partnership in the livery grew into full ownership when Cooper retired, giving the family both ranching and business interests in Silver Reef. They would have two more children, a daughter, Margaret, in 1882, and another son, James, in 1885. The ranch became known for its hospitality and fair dealing, a legacy built by a woman who refused to be defined solely as a widow and a man who recognized the strength in starting again. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade presented Nora with a locket containing miniature portraits of their children on one side and, at her insistence, a small photograph of Thomas on the other. "He's part of our story," Nora explained when Wade questioned the inclusion. "Without him, without what I learned from loving and losing him, I might never have recognized what we could build together." Wade nodded, understanding. "We're the sum of all our loves and losses," he said, fastening the locket around her neck. "And I'm grateful for every part that led us here." As Silver Reef's silver boom faded and the town contracted in the late 1880s, the Lawson Ranch endured, adapting to changing times just as Nora had adapted to changing circumstances. The whispers about the widow who remarried too soon faded into stories about the family whose determination and love had created one of the region's most prosperous ranches. And if visitors noticed the portrait of Thomas Fletcher hanging respectfully in the study alongside family photographs that included Wade, they soon understood that in the Lawson household, the past was honored without letting it overshadow the joy of the present. In the spring of 1896, nearly 20 years after Thomas's death, Nora stood at his grave with a bouquet of wildflowers. She was 43 now, with strands of silver in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Wade stood respectfully at a distance, giving her a private moment. "You would be proud of the ranch," she told Thomas's headstone softly. "It's flourished beyond what we imagined, and I think you would approve of the man I chose to share it with. He sees me clearly, as you did." As she placed the flowers and turned to join Wade, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here from young bride to widow to wife again, from uncertain ranch manager to confident co-owner of a thriving property. The town that had once mocked her for being a widow now pointed to her as an example of resilience. The whispers had transformed into respect, the judgment into admiration. Wade took her hand as they walked back to their waiting wagon. "Happy?" he asked, the question he still posed regularly even after 16 years of marriage. "Yes," Nora replied simply, squeezing his hand. "Grateful for what was and what is and what will be." As they drove home toward the ranch where their children and grandchildren awaited them for Sunday dinner, Nora looked across the landscape that had witnessed her darkest grief and her most profound joy. Silver Reef had changed, diminished from its boom years, but still persisting. Like her, it had weathered loss and found new purpose. She glanced at Wade, the sun highlighting the silver in his beard, his blue eyes still clear and vibrant as the day they met. He had been right all those years ago. She had loved before, and she had loved again. Not despite her past, but carrying it forward into a future richer than she could have imagined during those dark days of widowhood. That evening, surrounded by family at their long dining table, Wade raised a glass in a toast. "To beginnings that follow endings," he said, his eyes finding Nora's across the table, "and to the courage it takes to embrace them." Their eldest son, now a strong young man of nearly 16 with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, added, "And to the ranch that brought you together." Nora smiled, feeling the weight of her locket against her heart, containing both parts of her journey. "To love," she said simply, "in all its forms across all of life's seasons." And as glasses clinked and children laughed, and the golden light of sunset streamed through the windows of the home she had fought to keep and then chosen to share, Nora knew with absolute certainty that the path from grief to joy, though neither straight nor easy, had led exactly where she was meant to be.